at least from my perspective, this letter is really almost issued in draft form. It's really intended to be really a starting point for discussion with the board. At least some issues were raised to me that the board is concerned regarding how restaurants are currently, or potentially currently being regulated in town. So what I attempted to do in this memo was to first, identify what I thought the applicable definitions are today. And then moving along on table 1 on page 2 of the memo that was prepared December 28th, 2015, it identifies the types of restaurants, and I'm going to talk about this table a little bit more in a moment, and where they're permitted. And I had some general planning findings, and then I did a little bit of research, and I looked to see other definitions of restaurants throughout the state, and I provided some that I thought were, for Fairhaven, were some of the most, I thought, clear definitions as potentially a starting point if the board felt that the current definitions are currently vague or could be improved. And then I propose potentially some changes to those definitions moving forward, and some other recommendations and conclusions. The first thing, just from a planning standpoint, I just want to point out that I think the board already understands that restaurants are one of the most difficult land uses to regulate. And at least from a planning perspective, if changes are needed in order, some of the questions that I would have from a planning standpoint are concerns right now. Are they design related? Are they related to the potential intensity that can occur at restaurants? Or is the issue of a mom and pop versus a chain restaurant type of issue? I think those are the 3 generally core issues that you deal with restaurants. And then there is I guess I'll classify it as an error. I think I indicated that drive-thrus, or at least I inferred that drive-thrus may not be specifically prohibited. When speaking with the zoning officer, he clarified with me that I guess I wasn't aware that there's a 100% prohibition of drive-thrus in the township in a different area of the ordinance. Is that correct? Yes. So that currently right now, if anything that I refer to drive-thrus, that's already prohibited. I never actually reconciled the exact section. So I'm really here at the board's leisure. How would you like me to proceed? Are there areas that you'd like me to focus on at this point?
Questions for Mr. Ricci? Comments, thoughts, perspective?
Well, we look at a specific one that we brought up. We talked about a corner of Kingsland and Frank, where there was no business identified.
Right.
No business identified. When they came before the zoning board, I guess they came here and they came back to the zoning board later.
The zoning board first, then came here.
So, which was eventually approved. Now it's Dunkin' Donuts that's going in. And I think this board's concern was, they have looked at it a little differently. We knew it was going to be a Dunkin' Donuts rather than just a night candy store. So how do we, it's approved use, right, Mr. Barry?
There is no formal zoning application that's filed for the use at this time. There is a sign, and there's no doubt
But
that.
that, right now, as it sits, that would be an approved use Dunkin' Donuts. Right?
Yes, it would.
And this, by the way, actually dovetails into one of the reasons Mr. Kimmel is here, because it's a mixed use, and we're having him review that definition. So it's good that collectively everybody's here to try to address the problem.
So I think that's kind of what brought this all to the forefront, is we may look at that differently. And then it was, well, what is Dunkin' Donuts? Is it a fast food establishment? Is it a restaurant? Is it a coffee shop? So we decided that we needed to better define what restaurants, fast food, drive-thrus, whatever they are, we need to define that.
Can we pause there real quick, because I think there's a point of application potentially planner that did review that application. And I pulled my file on that application. I actually have it with me this evening, so I even have my planning notes up there. And it was clear from my perspective that they didn't have a specific tenant involved associated with the previous approval, but it was approved for, it was clear in the plans, it said retail that was approved for. Their traffic study discussed retail as the ground floor use. Their parking tables all addressed retail, so I'm not sure, at least in my opinion, whether, at least in my opinion, I think placing a restaurant in there would be a deviation from that standard.
That is squarely my opinion as well.
But you say retail, but the ordinance says mixed use. It doesn't specifically say retail, does it?
Well, I'm talking about how that application was presented to this board and how it was approved by this board. It was presented.
Tell the board not to question whether or not that's an approved use. Simple as that.
I don't believe it. I mean, we make different opinions. I don't believe that a restaurant is an approved use based on that previous sentence.
Refresh my memory, what is that zone for right now there?
It may be an approved use in the zone. I don't believe this board approved a restaurant at that facility. Make the distinction.
That's the correct way of looking at it. And Mr. Ricci has stated that I think correctly, because, look, I'm going to go by recollection, but I think the specific question was raised that you have a plan use for the facility. And my recollection is that the board was told no, there was no plan use, and maybe that was correct at the time. Maybe it wasn't, but you were certainly informed by the applicant that there was no plan use at the time.
It was,
The difficulty, of course, is this could happen there or any other location, and I think that was one of the concerns that the board had, mixed use allows for that use without telling us what they're going to do. You might have approved it, you might not have. You might have put conditions on it, you might have looked at the traffic study differently. Essentially thinking about a restaurant type facility or what's planned for that. There's more traffic, maybe in some people's mind, there might be, per se, dentist office. Maybe the lawyer's office, but by the same token, you might have required a different setup if you knew it was going to be a restaurant. And that was sort of what the discussion was before. The question is,
I mean, other than the fact that this board, there's county roads involved, there's the amount of trips being generated involved that are being used by outside agencies. There's other factors that are involved outside of just the use.
But our discussion for the mayor evolved into, is Dunkin' Donuts actually a restaurant?
it did.
I believe the courts have, at least in years past, at one point, Dunkin' Donuts actually baked their own donuts on the premises. And my recollection, I haven't seen the case in a while, but at least in previous case law, it said that they were a restaurant and not a bakery, is my recollection. Confirm that, but I believe they're a restaurant.
So would Starbucks
They
be
serve
considered
other-
a restaurant?
Excuse me?
Would Starbucks then be considered a restaurant? It's kind of the same type of thing.
Well, we're going to have to discuss that, and
That's the problem. You can see the problem.
because Starbucks, I think Starbucks really should be, when I talk about a cafe, I think Starbucks is really a coffee house that serves accessory food items, and should be regulated as such.
But you differentiate between Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. To me, they're pretty much the same.
And that's why we need to maybe be clear, because it's very difficult to regulate restaurants as such. I currently believe, and I think to some extent, whether Dave agrees with everything right here, some of the questions I had with him were, okay, what happens if you have a delicatessen, a bagel type establishment, and the like, where do they fit in? And Dave, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
Takeout food.
they qualify under a takeout food establishment. And the board is going to have to read the definitions clearly, but I felt that a lot of the definitions, there's a great deal of vagueness between the current definition of restaurant, fast food, and takeout food establishment. And I think really some of Dave's and past interpretations have been based upon their historical interpretation and not maybe what's exactly in the written word of these definitions. And at least from that perspective, I think there's opportunity at a minimum to be as clear as possible. And when I did my research, I thought the Fair Havens Code, I like the fact that it really distinguishes between what a true sit-down restaurant is, a place maybe like a steakhouse where it's waiter service, waitress service, and the like. It distinguishes between a hierarchy of the type of restaurants, at least it attempts to do so. And then I did look at some other ordinances, and some of the language that I added in, I question if it's even defensible, but like, for example, you come into town, sometimes towns are trying to encourage healthy food options. Some towns try to discourage maybe the more commercialized establishments are trying to encourage a more mom and pop feel. Right now, Jersey City has a very controversial ordinance. I'm not sure if it's been adopted or passed, but they're literally trying to regulate or limit change in commercial establishments, not just for restaurants, but for other retail uses, based upon the number of them that are located within something like literally a 30 or 300 mile radius of the city.
Dollar
Not dollar stores, but and the current point is they feel that they don't want to have a homogeneous, they almost call it, even in New York City, the Starbucks effect, where every corner is a Starbucks, and so on and so on. So there is some uncertainty in the law. And I put in a couple of things that I saw as really some of the most restrictive definitions that I had. There's codes that try to attempt to regulate the type of utensils. One provision that I added in, and I think it's not a good provision, and I think it needs to be vetted, and it talks about what I saw in other Essex County or urban communities, where they attempt to try and encourage a more mom and pop feel to regulate the amount of open counter area that is located inside these spaces. So you can be very nitpicky and try to be very particular, or you can be more generalized. However, I thought, at least in my initial review, that there is clearly an opportunity to have clearer definitions for what a restaurant is, and not to have this overlap. And the zoning officer would really have to overly create their own opinion on what this is.
Dave, would you think of some of those definitions and how they would be applied in the town, in some of our current uses and in
Right now, we have-
future uses?
Right now, we have like 3 key definitions that we use. A restaurant, a takeout food establishment, and fast food. And we don't get much fast food. And my real concern is the way that the fast food restaurant is worded. And I agree that we really need to work on that definition, because the way it's written is very vague, and it's not clear on what a fast food restaurant is. I put most of our uses that you see along Franklin Avenue, a lot of them as takeout food establishments. Several of them, a Chinese food restaurant, a bagel store, what's a recent one? Bonchon Chicken. These are, in my opinion, and the way that we viewed them in the past, these takeout food establishments. Muscle Maker Grill.
Dunkin' Donuts are forward as well, right?
Dunkin' Donuts.
That's the current use. I'm talking about some of the suggestions that Mr. Ricci made. Today, did you get a chance to review them?
Current definition.
Yeah. The only thing I'm a little concerned about is some of the like specifics on like the use of utensils and
Yeah,
like
that has to be-
micromanaging. All in all, our ordinance works very well, I'll tell you that. But our definitions need some clarity, because fast food restaurant, you guys have it, the present one, read, what is it? It really could be the Subway that's there. It could be the Bonchon Chicken. I mean,
I think what perhaps would be helpful to the board would be for Mr. Ricci and Mr. Barry to meet at some point over the next couple of weeks. Go through the definitions that Mr. Ricci has proposed in conjunction with the current zoning